Hello, Jason. Welcome to WTF, Wholesome Twin-Flame Coaching. How are you doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Still lingering cough, but I look much better than last time, I hope. All right, so I hope you had a good New Year's.
Yeah, I did. It was kind of quiet.
Did you do anything special?
Not really. Just stayed at home, kind of hung out with a friend, got a little introspective, and did a little work digging in, kind of more of a meditative time. And
Yeah, it was a good time to meditate and go deep, that's for sure. New year, new beginnings, definitely. But instead of talking about New Year's resolutions, let's just talk about everyday resolutions and continue with our topic of boundaries that we started last time. So just as a small recap, what did we talk about exactly, Jason? Do you remember?
having that safe place and knowing what is safe and where to put those boundaries in place to where you can continue your growth and you're not in this destructive being torn down every time you feel like you've taken a few steps up the mountain. You're not sideswiped by a landslide that just throws you back to the start again.
Yeah. So, just to talk a little bit more about boundaries and what psychology tells us about them. There are different kinds of boundaries, and I took some notes, so if I look to the side, that's why. It's really important to get to know your boundaries in regard to different aspects of your life, one of which would be what your intellectual worth and boundaries are. And that includes being entitled to your own thoughts and opinions. So in other words, if somebody else is putting you down all the time because you think differently from them, that would be considered a breach of boundaries. Right? So another one would be and the emotional worth and boundaries, how you feel about yourself and how another person may impact that negatively. It's really important. You are entitled to your own feelings. So if you grew up with somebody, for instance, who tried to be supportive but had really odd wording and just kept saying, well, you shouldn't feel like this, that might have actually impacted you, and you might be rather apprehensive about how people perceive your feelings, and you might be in a position where you keep seeking approval for your feelings, which is important in regard to twin flame relationship, because we're so closely interlinked that we often, well, not only is it the case, but we often want the other person to feel what we feel, but they don't necessarily do that. So that then can be a source of conflict, I find. Have you noticed that at all, Jason?
Yeah, and there's, I know in my experience, there's kind of nearly this illusionary state of, I kind of think I know how the other side is feeling, or my feelings are so deep that I feel like they are feeling that same way too, or that there's kind of a similarity there. But at least in my current experience with her, it's been more, I don't know, I feel a lot of there's just not being honest in there. There's a lot of, and probably on both sides, I sense that she's not truly being honest with herself or with me. But in the same sense, I don't feel like I can completely be honest with her, because all I'm getting from her is just a cold wall of rejection. And, you know, as far as she's concerned, it's done, it's over, she's moved on, she's got somebody else. And I don't want to cause conflict or trouble necessarily. I mean, if she's happy and moved on, then for one thing, this probably wasn't what I thought it was. I mean,
Or it might just be an assertion of boundaries, which it very often is. When one of the twin flames seeks to pull away from the relationship, it's because they're still trying to figure out their own boundaries. Especially important when it comes to the emotional worth and boundaries. Because our twin flame challenges us to a great extent, we are really thrown back onto ourselves in regard to figuring out what is actually going on inside of us emotionally. How do other people affect that? And it's easy to lash out at the one closest to us, which in this case would be our twin flame, which then of course causes all sorts of other problems. But as we mentioned last time already, it is actually a way to assert self-love when you lash out. Obviously, it's not an elegant way, but it is asserting your own self-worth. It is telling the other person, hey, this was a breach of my boundary and this is not okay. The goal, of course, is, as with any boundary, not just emotional ones, to get to a place where you feel so self-empowered and self-loved that you are able to tell the other person in a kind way that there is a boundary that they should not cross. But since twin flames are so intermingled, it can be really very much of a challenge. And sometimes it might be worthwhile to just separate for a while to figure out what's going on inside of you and deal with other challenges in life so that you can focus on this particular aspect of boundaries again, the emotional one. Although there are other ones as well. There's physical worth and boundaries. Everybody's entitled to their own space, for instance. And that can also occur with twin flames very easily. Since we feel so close to each other, getting to each other's space can become an issue. I've heard that from a few couples that I've counseled before and I've talked to. What is your experience with that, Jason?
I can definitely relate to that. There's, for so much of my life, I've kind of been on my own and just totally had a farm to myself, or apartments or whatever. So the cohabitation and kind of being around somebody else isn't necessarily something that I was just greatly that elegant at intermingling with my current living situations. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there was a lot of that at the time, I think, had we kind of had our own stuff to do and we could have separated out more and not just constantly been kind of around each other and on top of each other, that I think there might have been some of that break. That's in the end, that's kind of the stress that hit me, is I just needed a little space and time to breathe. And I mean, I never meant to make it as permanent and as devastating as it ended up being. But, like you said, I got to that point of trying to harvest a self-love that it was just kind of, it got to that nasty point of, okay, everybody just needs to go away so I can figure this crap out for a while.
Yeah, personal space is very important, physical space. Obviously, when you're freshly in love especially, you want to be around each other all the time. But then when you get to a point where you have to start living life together, like within any other relationship, you have to figure out, the ins and outs of the relationship. How much space does everybody need? Then when you're thrown into a space that's rather small, for instance, and you're literally on top of each other all the time, it can become rather difficult, especially when one has, a need to share something and the other person really needs their space, but there are still some communication issues going on. People are not necessarily comfortable communicating what their needs are. So even though they may even know their boundary, they don't know how to communicate it well. Excuse me. And then obviously that is always source for tension and conflict. But I think a good communication would actually be very helpful in that regard. But that's only possible when you actually know your boundaries. So another one that actually plays well in with that is the social worth and boundaries. Everybody's entitled to their own friends and social life. And I've noticed that when people become so intermingled that they don't feel the need to branch out anymore and have their own friends, separate friends sometimes, that things become difficult or can become difficult. So I find it really important that everybody still has their own life in a way, with their own friends and their own hobbies, not only so that you actually have something to talk about when you're spending time together, don't run out of stuff to say, but also to, have people to bounce your ideas and feelings back off on, and get some perspective on things, and just know what it feels like to be just by yourself and with yourself and other people, as opposed to being the one with your twin flame. I think that's especially important with a twin flame relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree there. Lots of good aspects there that could have taken advantage of. The communication, for sure. I think that's one thing. I know I've never been the greatest at communication, especially in a relationship, and in some of those after my twin flame relationship kind of fizzled out. I went to California for a job, and the boss that I had there would just get so frustrated at me because I wouldn't actually just say what was going on. I have this kind of people pleaser within me that is a really dangerous and really negative thing. In a way, we're taught that it's a good thing and it's helpful and that you're, making people happy, but it's really not. Because that people pleaser aspect of me makes me want to try to say things that will make others happy. And that's very, very dangerous, because if you're not speaking your truth, for one, you really don't know what's going on in another person. So this crap that we're coming up with that we think is going to make somebody else happy or what somebody else wants to hear is totally just our own mental chatter and crap. We have no idea what the other person really wants or is going to think, and that's gotten me in trouble with a lot of recent conversations with her, because I see her in a certain place, so I'm not speaking my truth. For example, just a couple days ago, she asked what I wanted from her. I wasn't able to make a response. In truth, if I'm honest with myself, I want her to come back and be my partner. I want her to help me run all of this. I want her to be involved in it, and I want us to work together and make this great thing out of, that's been one of the hardest things for me going into this. And what I'm doing now is, she was supposed to be my partner. She was supposed to be here with me, and facing all of this on my own, when, like you say, there was that aspect of friendship that you brought up too in the social paradigm, and throughout our relationship, all of my friends faded away. She became everything. She was my best friend. She was my partner. She was everything to me. So there's so much of that loss in there that I feel like I've just lost, the other half of my true team and self. Mm-hmm. But in the same sense, it's there's been a lot of good lessons, and there's been a lot of learning in that. I'm working on and learning how to love myself at deeper levels. And one thing I ran across was, for Virgo, my mantra for the year is supposed to be, I am enough. Mm-hmm. And so I've been working on that instead of I need help. But not quite there, but every day I think is a step, and it's a journey and a path.
And that is so important, especially with twin flame relationships, to know that you are enough. Just because you are so intermingled does not mean that you need to be together in order to be enough. You are enough separate. And this is one of the biggest lessons for us to learn, I believe. It feels so comfortable being with the other person. Yeah, in the good times. So comfortable. You think you're completely complete and loved and whole and everything perfect. But you need to learn, and this, I believe, what these phases are there for. You need to learn that you are enough at any given moment in life. Even if you screw up something, you are enough. Even if you have a mental breakdown, you are enough. Even if you screw up your relationship, you're still enough. And until you get to that point of really feeling enough and feeling that you are the love of God, like each and every one of us is, and the partner feels that too, chances are there'll be more conflict just so that we can learn this particular lesson, I believe. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, for sure. It's and it is. It's a lot of lessons in that self-love and that realizing that it isn't anything external.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, that's kind of one of the frustrating things that I have trying to see eye to eye with her right now, because it feels like she's more grabbing for the external things. But in the same sense, there's an aspect of me wanting her involved, which is an external aspect, and not, not going within, not realizing that I am enough aspect of it is all within. I mean, I was doing good with that, and kind of hit some backlash from some of the twin flame groups as I was digging into some of that. Because there's nearly this odd place of, okay, well, I found it, I connected within, and then some of these misunderstandings of, oh no, you should be like passionately pushing towards getting back with your twin flame now. And I'm like, I don't think so. I was happy, I was good, and
Yeah.
Passionately pushing towards something that doesn't feel right at any given moment, I don't believe is a good thing. We attract what we put out, and as soon as we are satisfied in ourselves and our lives, we attract more of satisfying things. And either the twin flame catches up, which they eventually will, because we are so interconnected, or not. But during the time that they're not, we still have to be enough, we still have to be happy within ourselves. Why forcibly push ourselves into a situation where we're unhappy? That's not going to benefit anybody, I believe. And that actually kind of plays into the next point, where I want to talk briefly about the boundaries when it comes to spiritual worth. Everybody's entitled to their own view of the world, whether it be religion or spirituality in general, or how they want to live their spirituality. Just because they start out as a twin flame couple and then you have different kind of focus in life that doesn't necessarily match up at that particular time, does not mean that you're not a twin flame or that your relationship is doomed forever and ever. It just means that you need to explore different things. And that is also a boundary. If one of you needs to explore those things, the other person has to respect that kind of boundary. And I think that's really important. But it's also very difficult because we feel so close to the other person. We think that, okay, I've just grown. I've just realized this major thing. I had this epiphany. Why don't you see this? And we want to push them to see similar things. And I find myself guilty of that very much. Because I am a coach and I'm a healer. I have a completely different outlook on life than other people have sometimes in twin flame relationships. And I just wonder, it's like, if you know that the twin flame relationship is supposed to provide spiritual growth for you, how come you don't see this? And then I have to step back and say, okay, well, everybody's in their own world. Everybody has their own focus. Everybody has their own view of life, depending on which lenses they wear based on their life experiences. And everybody has to respect that. Obviously, as a coach, I do. But even within twin flame relationships, it's important to respect that. Well, how do you see this?
Yeah, for sure. That's one of those elements I think causes more confusion at times, because we do go in this kind of with an expectation of this will be more spiritual growth, and some of those aspects that I think allow us to not take as much time and consideration in the relationship as we normally would. And there's still some of those things there that are very valuable and important. for example, you expect the other person to know when you're upset or when you've been hurt or something like that, but just because this is supposedly a twin flame relationship doesn't mean we're all absolutely 100% psychic for each other and like know everything that's going on with each other. There's still the tools like, hey, when you do this, it makes me feel this way. That those little communication and counseling kind of tips that I've had over the years of, you can't just expect somebody to know what's going on inside of you, even in this case where you are supposed to be connected deeper than with anybody in the world. There's still that consideration of affecting me, so the other person is at least a little more clued in and saying, okay, I can understand that, I see what I'm doing now, and either work on making corrective actions, or obviously they don't give a care, so they're not. But at least they've been made aware that this is why you're upset, or this is why you're breaking down over, what I'm doing.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, because this is really how we get to know our limits and our boundaries. Feelings like discomfort, anger, resentment, and frustration. You have to look out for those 4 when it comes to boundaries. Is any interaction, is any action by another person making you angry? Does it frustrate you? Does it make you feel uncomfortable in any way? Or do you start resenting them for it? Those are clear indicators that there's apparently a limit to what you're willing to take in order to preserve your mental, emotional health and enjoy your personal freedom, your social freedom, etc. That's how you find out what your boundaries actually are. So in other words, and that's important for the spiritual community, who's very often taught, well, to be in unconditional love always means to be always happy, always forgiving, never be angry. Well, that's just plain BS, to be honest, because emotions are an indicator to figure out, if there's a boundary, what the boundary actually is, if a situation is good for us or not. It's actually our inner guidance system. If we didn't have these emotions, we would not be able to follow our intuition. How else would you know not to walk around a certain corner in the city if you didn't feel your gut instinct of sudden fear, for instance? Feelings are good. Being spiritual just means to be able to handle those feelings wisely, to listen to them, know what action to take. And in regard to boundaries, it just means if you feel uncomfortable in a situation, somebody's probably breaching a boundary, and you might want to sit down and contemplate what exactly happened, and then figure out how to, assert this boundary with that particular person. Whether they say something continuously that bugs you, or whether you start being angry with them because of a certain kind of behavior pattern, or even when you start resenting somebody. It's usually a bit of a step further. The anger has been festering for a while, in my experience. But those are all very good indicators to know what your boundaries are. So take the time and actually sit with those feelings and take them seriously. Don't beat yourself up for having them. They're necessary. Welcome them, sit with them, and then make sure that you change the situation so that those feelings are not evoked in you anymore. That's really what the point is, I believe. And in twin flame relationships, it's so interesting because we are so close. And it's so easy to get angry without even noticing what exactly happened. Excuse me. Because they're supposed to trigger us in a way and really lead us back to our deepest hurts so we can start healing them. So figuring out what the boundary is there is a bit more challenging than with other people. When your coworker keeps dumping work on you, which you don't want to do, makes you feel uncomfortable, you might get angry at some point, but it's easier to figure out what the boundary is there. So, okay, this is my workload. What the hell? What are they doing? And, you sit down, you figure that out. I work 50 hours a week, he 40. Easy. That's a boundary. With your twin flame, not so much. They'll say something and whoa, you react and you got triggered. And it might take a while to figure out that the trigger is actually due to some past hurt that occurred in your childhood, because your mother said exactly the same thing in exactly the same tone of voice and hurt you exactly the same way. Very different, because it's a different kind of closeness and, emotional closeness there, which I find interesting. So what do you do to assert your boundaries then, Jason? What do you think is a healthy way in regard to a twin flame relationship, at least?
That's probably still something I'm working on learning.
Aren't we all?
And that's where part of what I used to think was a good thing in being a people pleaser, I'm really learning isn't, because once again, it's sacrificing me and what I really love and desire for, like I say, these weird thoughts and these things in my head that say, hey, this is what they want to hear, or this is how things are going, when that may just be some crap that I picked up with something I was listening to or watching that got into my mind and started running around. It may have absolutely nothing to do with the other person. And more that is the realization, is most of what we experience isn't necessarily our outside, or isn't the other person, or isn't the external. It's the reflection of the conditions we have within us. And I mean, that's where, once again, the mirroring exercise, all of those things are very useful tools, because they take you back to that source, to that internal root of where the issue really lies, instead of doing what we typically do in society and displace things all over everybody and throw blame out, but never take responsibility and consider that, hey, this may be me, this may be something I need to work on. And like you had mentioned, the aspects of feelings and emotions, it's not that we really try to get to a point of ascending those and going past them, but as we become more spiritual and aware and conscious, we're able to consciously acknowledge those feelings and those emotions that come up. And then we're able to actually be aware and see what those mean as we work with them, instead of just getting angry and saying, well, that's her fault, or that's, that's because of my dad or my brother, or, it's not.
The blame game never knows.
Exactly. It's being able to take that next step and take responsibility. And that's one thing I've always loved about Satguru's teachings, is the way he expands out is you take responsibility for yourself, and then he just kind of steps it out more and more, and it's like, okay, can you be responsible for your family? Can you be responsible for your town, for your state, for your country, for the world, and for the universe? But it's this beauty of being responsible empowers us. It doesn't limit us, and it doesn't confine us. I think a lot of us are afraid to take on responsibility because we see it as if I'm taking on responsibility, I'm putting on a yoke, I'm putting on a burden, I'm putting on something that's going to weigh me down.
Yeah.
When it's not really that way. And that's why I love the way Satguru explains it, because he looks at responsibility as your ability to respond.
Which is an awesome point. And I think we should talk about that in detail next time, because it's a huge topic in and of itself. But yes, boundaries, being responsible for yourself, being responsible for your own well-being is something everybody needs to learn in life. And your twin flame definitely pushes you towards it, especially when it comes to emotional boundaries, but any kind of boundary, really. But yeah, talking about self-responsibility is going to help us further with this topic as well, which we're going to talk about next week. Because the more we learn about self-responsibility, the more we understand what boundaries are really about, because we are still stuck in this paradigm of wanting to be people pleasers. So many societies teach us to be that way. And I think it's really important subject to discuss and learn more about.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I know it was deep ingrained in me growing up, but
Yeah.
I think it's a common
in
thing.
so many of us, and yeah.
Learning to say no. There are plenty of books written just about that, and it has all to do with self-responsibility and boundaries, and it's a huge topic. So, yeah, let's talk about that next week. Sounds absolutely great to me. Again, if you have any questions, please write them to us on our Facebook pages or here in the chat anytime. We'll definitely pick them up and discuss your questions and answer them. Share our videos and join us again next Monday. It was great seeing you. Great seeing you, Jason.
Yes, great to connect and chat again. Always a good time.
Yeah, it is. All right. See you all next time. Bye.